This time on Kitty Litter Garage, I get this thing running on its own power. Well, I'd say this project has officially crossed the point of being a teardown and has officially become a build. The Lincoln has come a long way from the SUV that I started with. The entire back half has been removed. The remaining roof, windshield, and A-pillars are all gone. I think I have removed everything I need to so I can start fitting the F-150 cab that I have over there onto this chassis. And believe it or not, this thing is running and driving. I put this dash in, I fired up the engine, and took it for a quick trip down my long driveway just to prove it still runs. And after cutting away that much of the body and seeing it drive under its own power was pretty damn cool, if I must say so.
What follows is a brief construction montage.
No time to waste. My first cut is going to be along the bottom of the windshield and then across the base of the A-pillars. I figured it was easier and much less messy to cut the seal along the bottom of the windshield. I started across the bottom and worked my way through the remaining structure along the cowl. Even with all the tiny glass shards, the cut went pretty smoothly. I had used a pruning blade, the ones used to cut tree branches with, to cut through the polyurethane seal and not into the metal below. When I had cut through the A-pillars earlier, the carbide blade cut right through them, even with 4 layers of metal. These are pretty substantial chunks of metal, and they're also one of the last things that keep the roof attached to the rest of the vehicle. Unfortunately, the footage of this was a casualty of my camera overheating, so you have to take my word for it. So much for the tree trimming blade. Well, this looks all cut through. So this is fun. So looks like the next. So we're gonna cut the back of this, and we'll go from there. The goal here is to get the entire front roof section off in one piece, or at least that's the plan. I moved the gantry into place to help support the roof before I started cutting on the B-pillars. This is the same harness that I used when I removed the back of the body in the last episode. Oh, one little spot of glue left. Let's get this going here. Where are my safety goggles? Okay, I measured the inside of the pickup right over here. And it was 46 inches from the floorboards to the inside of the roof in the corner. And over here, I measured this, and it's 47.5 inches to this corner, and it's got more of an arc in the roof than the truck does. So, I'm gonna cut this right along here. I'm gonna do that here. We're gonna cut right along there. That's when things are going to get really interesting. And then, we're pulling the roof completely off. Stay tuned. The only major structural connections that are left at the moment are those B-pillars. And once those are cut, well, there's really nothing left holding this roof on. 1/16 of an inch. That's 1, 2.
Now, 1/16 of an inch doesn't sound like a whole hell of a lot, but when you're trying to lift the entire roof off a vehicle, apparently a 1/16 of an inch is enough to keep the whole thing attached. That's it. The final cut's been made. The roof is no longer attached to the Lincoln. And after all the cutting, grinding, removing all the bolts, and taking this Lincoln apart piece by piece, this is the moment where you can really see how far the project has come. This isn't a Lincoln anymore. Well, not much of one anyway.
Well, there you have it. The front half of the roof. I'm gonna make a couple more cuts on this and stuff it in the back of the other half. But damn, look at this baby now. Does that look sporty or what? Okay, next we're gonna put the dash back in and see if I can take it for a little rip. The insurance drops off on this in a couple weeks, and I want to at least rip it on the road once before we get the truck body on it.
Well, with the roof finally off, I've got another problem to deal with. There's metal and shards everywhere. All those cuts that I made left the cowl area covered in shards, chips, and little pieces of metal. And before I start putting everything back together, I need to get that all cleaned up. I'm using my shop vac to get as much of the stuff out of the cowl as I can, and it's just one of those jobs that isn't particularly exciting, but it's definitely necessary. The last thing I want is a pile of sharp little pieces of metal finding their way into the wiring or ending up somewhere that I don't discover until much, much later. And then I've got that vinyl tarp that I used to catch a lot of the debris. At this point, there's a lot more Lincoln in this than I expected. So I'm taking it outside, giving it a good shake, and putting it away. Now back inside the Lincoln, if you can call it that, I've got another mess to deal with. The chassis and wiring harness are covered in the same little metal shavings and debris that the tarp didn't catch. So I'm going over everything with the vacuum again. I'm being especially careful around the wiring because the last thing I need is a tiny little piece of metal working its way into a connector. At this point, I spent enough time cutting things apart, and I'd really like to stop accidentally creating new problems. Once I get the obvious debris cleaned up, I can start dealing with the wiring harness itself. The harness is still rolled up in the footwells of the chassis, so I need to get it moved out of the way and clean underneath. I'm carefully pulling the harness out, getting it spread back into position. Then it's back to the vacuum again. There's plenty of debris hiding underneath it, so I'm going over the chassis one more time. This is definitely one of those jobs where you think you're finished cleaning, and then you move one thing and find another pile of shavings. But eventually I got the chassis cleaned up enough that I can start putting things back together. And the first major piece going back in is the dash. The dash has been sitting on a little cart off to the side since we took it off several weeks ago. So I'll wheel it over and get it ready to go back into the Lincoln. I'm using the gantry and a couple of tie-down straps to support it and lift it in position. This makes it a whole lot easier to position the dash without trying to hold it up while simultaneously trying to figure out where everything goes. And believe me, I'm going to need both hands for this next part. With the straps attached, I can slowly lift the dash back into position. The idea here is to get the dash sitting roughly where it belongs and then start working on the wiring behind it. And this is where things got frustrating. What you're seeing here doesn't really show how many times I put the dash in and then back out. And I put it in, bolted it down, take it back out, move the harness, pull the dash back in, take it back out, move the harness a little more. There were several rounds of this before I finally got everything positioned in a way that I wanted it and it would bolt down. The problem is the wiring harness has to be fit behind the dash and routed in certain ways, and there's not a lot of extra room to work with or extra length in the harness. So every time I thought I had it where it needed to be, I'd find another section of harness that didn't want to cooperate. Eventually, I got it close enough that I could start connecting everything. And that's where this real test begins. Now I can start reconnecting the main harness blocks. I'm starting on the driver's side, where I had the most trouble making the connections. The main harness and one of the fuse boxes is in this area. And there was a channel where this connection has to run and it didn't want to stay there. But finally, it clicks into place and I can bolt it together. Then I move over to the passenger side and I get this simple connection made as well. At this point, I am starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, this dash is going to stay put. With the wiring finally positioned and the main blocks hooked up, I can start bolting the final bolts back into the chassis. And this is where all the messing around with the harness finally paid off. I'm starting with this final mounting point on the cowl. Once that's secured, I can work my way across the dash and down towards the transmission tunnel. There are several brackets and mounting points that have to go back together, basically one on each side. So this part is basically just a lot of bolts, a couple of brackets, and reaching around things. And try not to drop hardware into places I can't get to. After spending so much time getting the wiring harness positioned correctly, I'm taking my time here. I don't want to tighten everything down only to discover that I've pinched a wire or trapped something behind the dash. So I'm working my way through each mounting point, getting everything aligned and tightened down. From the cowl across the dash and down to the transmission tunnel. This is one of those parts of the build that isn't particularly glamorous. There's no giant piece of metal ready to fall on my head. No sparks, no dramatic reveal, just putting things back together. But after everything I've cut off this vehicle, it feels pretty good to finally be putting something back on. And with the dash finally bolted down, I can move on to something just a little more satisfying. The shifter. Now, the shifter wasn't too bad in itself. Thank God it has a shifter cable and not shifter linkage like in the old days. Once the cable's connected, everything is sitting there where it needs to be, and I can just position the shifter in the transmission tunnel and area in the center console. It's just then a matter of getting the mounting holes lined up and installing the 4 bolts that hold it down. Compared with fighting with the wiring harness, this part is actually going pretty smoothly. Which is a nice change. From one bolt, then another, and then the last 2. And that's it. The shifter is finally back where it belongs. After cutting off the roof, cleaning up all the debris, fighting with the wiring harness, reinstalling the dash, I'm finally starting to put this Lincoln back together. Still a long way from an F-100, but at least now, instead of everything coming off, some things are actually going back on. And that is progress. Now with the shifter installation complete, I'm moving onto the instrument cluster and the rest of the controls around the dash. And this is where I get to deal with one of those parts that looks like it should be really simple, but it isn't.
The instrument cluster must fit into the dash, and there are several things that have to line up at the same time, because apparently putting in a piece of trim back onto this Lincoln requires the coordination of about 6 different things happening simultaneously. I'm also having to work around this little leather and plastic trim piece above the steering column that is glued to the column, and you must fold it the right way to get the bezel past it. There are 4 bolts that actually hold the bezel to the dash. But that's not all going on here. There are several metal push clips that have to snap into place as well. And of course, the wiring that needs to be routed around all of it. That plastic and leather trim piece has to be positioned correctly, and everything has to line out without pinching anything, but it'll fall into place once you have it in correctly. And this is just one of those jobs where you can get it almost perfect and then discover just one little wire is in exactly the wrong place. Eventually, I get the bezel where it needs to be and secure it down, the clips, the bolts, the wiring, and hopefully I won't have to take this thing apart again, at least not today. Next up is the headlight switch and bezel. Here you can see the wiring harness that had to feed through the bezel and into the correct locations. Those get connected to the switch, then I can install the switch bezel into the dash. Another little piece of the interior goes back where it belongs. And while I'm in there, I can reconnect the yaw sensor. 2 connectors with a satisfying little click. Next, it's time to put in the center console. The console has to line up with the dash, the transmission tunnel, and all the wiring underneath. At this point, I'm trying to put the interior back together without trapping any wires or forgetting them. I've learned that lesson the hard way. There are 2 main ground wires under the center console that I forgot to connect up, and so I had to pull the console back out and connect those grounds. But once everything's lined up, I can get the console secured with 4 bolts. And with that back into place, the interior's starting to look like one. I'll leave you here with my split screen montage. Next up, it's the driver's seat. And because this is a Lincoln, naturally, the driver's seat doesn't just have a couple of wires, it has a whole collection of them. I've got connections for the heated seat, the cooled seat, the seat moving forward, the seat moving backward, up, down, lumbar, and probably a few other things that I haven't discovered yet. I mean, hell, it's a Lincoln after all. You just don't sit in a Lincoln. The car's supposed to make you comfortable while you're sitting in there. So I'm getting all these connections hooked back up before I bolt the seat down. And there's no sense in securing the seat and then discovering that I forgot one connector that's now completely inaccessible. Once everything's connected, I can get the driver's seat back into position, and that's another big piece of the interior back where it belongs, although very temporarily. Now that I've got the major interior components back into place, I need to deal with something that's not nearly as exciting, but extremely important: the wiring harness. I've got a bunch of harnesses running inside where the body used to be, and I need to get them all organized and secured. I'm laying everything out so I can exactly see where each harness needs to go, and I will eventually need to thin out the circuits I won't need. You know, like, why would I need AC in the open bed of the truck?
I am holding Velcro to hold everything in position for now. The nice thing about using Velcro is I can still make adjustments if I need to. And believe me, I'm not assuming everything is going to stay exactly where I put it this time. I'm also reconnecting the wiring for the trailer lights, and that brings up another important consideration, the drive shaft. Once this thing is running and moving on its own, I really don't want the wiring harness anywhere near a spinning drive shaft. That's because the drive shaft has absolutely no respect for electrical wiring. If one of those harnesses even gets loose and finds its way to the drive shaft, it's not going to be very polite in moving it out of the way. It's going to grab it, pull it, and rip out half the wiring out with it. And I'd really rather not to have to troubleshoot that particular problem. So I'm taking the time to route everything safe and keep it secured away from anything that's going to be moving. And this is one of those jobs that doesn't look like much on camera. It's basically me laying out wires, sticking Velcro to things. But getting this right now is going to save me a lot of headaches later. And with the harness finally laid out, secured, and out of harm's way, we're getting closer to the point where I can start treating this like a running vehicle again. The roof may be gone, and the body may be getting replaced, but there's still a ridiculous number of things left to do. But little by little, this Lincoln is starting to come back together.
We hope you enjoyed this brief construction montage.
Well, now it's the moment of truth. Did I screw this truck up, or is it going to start? Let's see what we got here. That's a good sign. We got exhaust in here. It's running. I like that. I don't have tail lights. I was hoping I could get that set up to have tail lights. But let me open the garage door. I'm going to asphyxiate myself. It's been a few months since I've had this thing actually running. So let's see, what do I got going on here? I got an airbag, which I'm expecting, ABS because the sensors aren't hooked up, and I've always had the tire pressure fault, so I think we're good. There's nothing out of the ordinary. That's good. We got to turn this thing around and put it in the other side of the shop. So let's do this. Ooh, it's moving. All right. We don't got much time. It's sprinkling out here, but it feels good with the frickin' humidity we've been having. Oh my God. But hey, it's drivable. That's pretty cool. Reverse. Here comes the rain. We better get inside. Woo! I'm not wearing my seatbelt. Sorry. Ah, damn. Wish the weather was better. I'd take this out on the road. Woo! Yeah, all right. We got this thing back and operational. So I know I still have a good running vehicle. Now, before I wrap things up, I want to apologize to all my subscribers about the long gap between my videos. Moving from Washington State to Florida has definitely been an adjustment, and this summer's heat and humidity have been on a whole new level for me. This Washington boy just wasn't ready for what it's like working in Florida in a metal garage in July without AC. With my lack of adjustment to the weather, my camera's overheating, and missing footage, things slowed down a bit more than I wanted. But I'm back in the garage, and this project is moving forward once again. In the next episode, the real fun begins. I'll start working on the F-100 cab so I can begin fitting it to this Aviator chassis. That's the moment I've been working toward since this project began, and I can't wait to see it all come together. If you are enjoying this build, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe if you already haven't, and leave a comment below. I really enjoy reading your comments, and your support helps keep this project moving forward. Thank you for hanging out in the garage with me today. I am Marty, and this is Kitty Litter Garage. Let's build something awesome.